Interesting. Thank you so much. So shifting gears a little here, I was a full preterist. I've said this to you before, right?
Yeah.
And I know you got the "I feel bad for you" look in your eye.
No, we're jumping to Revelation here. Okay.
Well, yeah, because it's you know when you jump on Myth Vision, you know how I do you. I don't mean to do you dirty.
That's great. Yeah, it's like my PhD exams. All right, bring it on.
Look, I want to point out that, like, when I was a Christian, I wanted to protect Jesus. I was kind of an apologist. I studied under a guy who studied under Norman Geisler. And I was sincere in trying to protect my faith. And if it's true, I should be able to prove it. Well, over the years, I started to shift my gears. I became a Calvinist because I recognized this whole predestinarian stuff in, like, Paul, Romans 9. Like, he has prepared for destruction, vessels, prepared for, and the way I had started to interpret this through the Protestant, Calvinistic view, I became a Presbyterian. But then I found out I needed to study eschatology, Dr. Ehrman. And one of the things that kept coming up is there's clear indication of time statements that the end is nigh. They're saying, get ready, it's about to happen. Any moment now, mellow. The Greek word mellow floats all over the place. So I started going, well, hold on. Paul, Jesus, everyone's saying it's about to happen. I'm a Christian in 2016. How in the world am I going to tell that these people, these men who are teaching at church, they know better than the Bible. They know better than Jesus. They know better than Paul. So I found myself in this tough spot as a Christian where I was like, how can I be right and the whole church be wrong? That Jesus said and Paul said, they're not liars. I can't say he's a false prophet. So I thought it had to happen. And this is what full preterism teaches. So they say it did happen. The synoptic gospels write that the destruction of the temple happened. And they say that's the evidence of the end that Paul thought, the end that the book of Revelation is teaching, the end that Mark, Matthew, Luke, John, John's really realized eschatology. But I just say that what they do is they have all the New Testament is pointing to the destruction of the Jerusalem temple as the end, the resurrection, the final judgment, everything. Because it can't go past that, Jesus' own words. I'm a fundamentalist, ex-evangelical, right? My question then is, it's this long thing I wanted to build up. Can you take down that idea with me here on this episode? Can you help me see why it didn't happen and how it failed?
Well, is it your sense that everybody who ever died was raised from the dead in the year 70?
The way they interpreted resurrection, of course, it depends on who you talk to, of course. They say, well, resurrection is covenant resurrection. It's not literal physical,
Do you think that's what Jews thought when they said the term resurrection? You can look. Of course, a lot of time over history, the preterist view hasn't been the year 70. It's been events that transpired over the course of history.
Right.
But because they didn't like the idea of setting dates, and so they said, well, actually, it's happened already. And so the persecution of Nero is the first horse of the horsemen of the apocalypse, and then and you kind of go through, and then Constantine's conversion is and you have you trace the whole history that way. But it's it's also a way of salvaging the fact that it's predicting something that didn't happen, and for probably very conservative evangelicals and fundamentalists, the idea that it happened in 70 is attractive because then, But the early Christians didn't think that was the fulfillment of it.
Right.
2 Peter was probably written 50 years after 70, written around the year 120, and it's trying to explain why God said it was going to be soon when it didn't happen soon. And it came up with explanations that are things that people would be familiar with. That with the Lord, a day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day. So if you say it's going to happen in 3 days, what you mean is going to happen in 3,000 years. And so, and the reason it hasn't happened is because God, that was the plan, but God was just, he's trying to get you to repent, and you haven't done it yet. So he's going to extend the time for a while, but it's still going to be soon. And so, you come up. So. He's not lying about it. He's just he's changing the timetable to give you a chance to repent. So there are all sorts of explanations, but I don't see anything in the year 70 that makes you think that the kingdom of God came to earth. I mean, and that the dead were resurrected, and that the heavenly Jerusalem came down, and that it's like I don't see it. It's it's 1,500 miles long and wide, by the way, this Jerusalem, with streets paved with gold and pearly gates. And I've traveled around the country, I haven't seen it. So
Right.
so what you have to do is say he doesn't really mean it literally. But once you say he doesn't mean it literally, what then binds you? What then constrains your interpretation? Why can't you just come up with anything?
Right.
If it's not literal, why not say, oh, actually it happened in the year 45, because that was the year that, it's like, just make up a year, which people still do today, of course. When people predict that, when somebody will say the end's going to come on, March 12th in the year 1993, and it doesn't come, then they say, oh, it actually did come, but nobody noticed.
Didn't that happen with the Millerite movement?
Yeah.
Clearly.
Well, yeah, and others since then. Very, very rarely does somebody say, okay, it's going to happen on June 19th, and then it doesn't happen. They say, yeah, I made a mistake. Sorry, my bad. Harold Camping did that, by the way. He predicted the actual date. It didn't happen. Then he said, I was off by 6 months, and 6 months came. It didn't happen, and he said, I was wrong. And like, that doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, that doesn't. So one thing in First Colossians, if you will, 5-6, and I'm sorry, maybe it's just Colossians. Sorry, not First Colossians.
Yeah, Colossians.
Colossians 5-6. I'm going to read it if you don't mind, and get you to maybe give your thoughts. The faith and love that spring from the hope stored up for you in heaven, and about which you have already heard in the true message of the gospel that has come to you. In the same way, the gospel is bearing fruit and growing throughout the whole world, just as it has been doing among you since the day you heard it and truly understood God's grace. So the idea is that Paul ostensibly believed that the gospel had, past tense, already gone out to the whole world, hence the end was nigh, and there was no need for further evangelizing. A lot of the people who are 70 AD doctrine, they'll look at the gospels, and there's this list of like signs, right? They're like, okay, well, we know that the temple's destruction is one of these signs. I see that as ex event to prophecy. Even if someone said it was going to fall, the way they wrote it is very meticulously detailed. So if some guy predicted that it was going to come down, like tons of people were saying, hey, this temple's coming down, you're messing with the Romans or whatever, that to me is not magical, or you have to believe in a miracle to think that happened. My point is, they look at all these details and then they say, and the end is not yet, but it's like about to happen, and that the gospel would be preached to the whole world is one of those signs. So they run to Paul. Their chronology, they don't really care about chronology. They just say the Bible teaches the Bible. And they go, Paul believed that the gospel has been preached to the whole world already. Can you like tell us how that doesn't work? Because from what I understand, Paul's heading to Spain. He's on his way to still preach the gospel that had already been preached to the whole world. It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, it doesn't really make sense. And for one thing, Paul probably didn't write Colossians. It's one of the books that he probably didn't write. And so it's somebody writing later. But Paul does use that kind of language when it doesn't make any sense for him, Paul himself. He says he's going to Spain in Romans. That's where he talks about it. And he says that he's going to Spain because he's finished up his work in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. I mean, I don't know how many churches he founded. We know a few, but he certainly didn't. And the gospel, but he said the gospel's been, it's been preached here. I'm going to finish it off by going to Spain. It's like either he doesn't have a very good sense of geography, or he's prone to exaggeration, or he thinks that what has to happen is like churches have to be planted in regions, and they're going to grow from there. So he's done the job planting, and so now it's all done. It'll be all done, and then Jesus will come back. But I don't see. I don't quite see how that's evidence for the year 70.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Acts 17. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance as 30 through 31. But now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. he has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. So this right here, to me, is obvious. It says what it says. But for some, this is 70 AD judgment, and every man everywhere, or all to repent everywhere, are only the elect. So they take a Calvinistic approach to a 70 AD doctrine, and you end up with this very limited concept. To me, I don't see that. So
I don't understand. How does Acts 17 have to do with the year 70?
Well, when you paint this picture, the end is supposed to happen in 70. Everything is kind of forced into that.
Yeah, but what about Acts 17 makes you think about the destruction of Jerusalem in the year 70?
Judgment. So they equate judgment, the final judgment, or judgment of the world. They think the world means covenant world. It's talking about the old covenant Israel, which is what was, everything's about that. And so what would you recommend to someone who's maybe really open-minded and they've just been taught this, like I was, but they're open-minded?
I just tell them, read the text. It doesn't say anything about Jerusalem being destroyed. I mean, it's got nothing to do with the Roman war. The fact it says judgment. What if you put something besides the Roman war in the year 70 for the judgment, right? So you translate judgment as the destruction of Jerusalem in 70. Why not say the invasion of the Martians? Every time it says judgment, it means that the Martians are going to come in, and so that's what it's talking about. And so you read Acts 17, see, it's talking about the Martians. What? Just read the text. The text says nothing about Martians or the destruction of Rome. What? I don't get it.
Why would you be in Athens preaching that to Epicureans and Stoics, according to that narrative, right?
That's what I'm saying. The whole context has nothing to do with the destruction of Jerusalem. It has to do with, it actually is not that straightforward of a passage. It's a very complicated passage. I had a PhD student, one of my early PhD students, write an entire book on this passage because it's complicated in interesting ways. But one of the notable things is that Acts 17, he's preaching to these philosophers, and what he says about his gospel message runs contrary to what Paul himself says in the book of Romans. Now, there's in this book that in this book he said, you read the part that everybody's ignorant, and so they don't know any better, and so there's judgment coming. Romans says no, nobody's ignorant. They know exactly what's going on. So you've got tensions with Paul, and there's all sorts of things going on in this passage, but destruction of Jerusalem is not one of them. It's just not.
That's what I thought, and it's just people that I've come from. So the reason this even
it's interesting. I didn't
there's a lot of that goes on in the crowds that I'm aware of from where I came out of, because we were trying to justify the Bible being
But if you say judgment means the year 70, then anytime the word judgment appears, you'll think the year 70. But I mean, why would you interpret it that way? And then
right,
somebody told you to.
That's a good point, because if you look at the Second Temple Judaism literature, like when judgment comes up, it's not talking about 70. It's not talking about that at all.
No.
So why aren't we using a broader vocabulary, if I can use the term, for other books to kind of get the idea like judgment, destruction of the world, all that kind of stuff is common in these apocalyptic texts.
And not just apocalyptic texts. I mean, in the Old Testament, you have judgment happening all the time. And
but that's their point. They'll say it's judgment of like Babylon or an empire or a region or something, never world cataclysmic. And so they never see.
Oh, no, that's the apocalyptic dimension. I mean, sometimes it is cataclysmic, but in the Old Testament, but in apocalyptic thought, it definitely is cataclysmic. And the destruction of Jerusalem in the year 70 was not cataclysmic. It destroyed Jerusalem. It didn't even affect all Jews it didn't affect most Jews in the world. It affected the people who lived in Jerusalem. And so to say that this is the end of history as we know it is predicted by Jesus, where the sun goes dark and the moon turns to blood, right. And it's like, no, that's not. That isn't what people are raised from the dead and the kingdom of God comes. No, it didn't. That is not 70. So people might be told that and they think, oh, that makes sense, but it's like, where does it come from?
Good point. I've got one of the gentlemen who holds to a position called Israel only. This is why Jason Staples' work was really interesting to me, is to try and learn more about the understanding of Israel and what is Paul doing, right? So here's what one of the questions that he asks. If, according to the story, the New Testament, and maybe even the Old, if you want to take in the whole picture, the New Testament end was the end of the Old Covenant religious system and the temple community, and that the end happened in AD 70, What was first century non-Israelites need salvation either before or after AD 70? So what would any non-Israelite need salvation for? The paradigm is that salvation is only for Israelites. So why would a non-Israelite ever need salvation? They'll say stuff like the law was given to Israel and no one else. So technically no one else needed salvation.
What does this person mean by the term salvation? The question.
It's a great question. It's not defined here in particular, but I think it's a salvation from the old covenant system. So they think the old covenant is what they're being saved from. And then of course being put into the new covenant. And a lot of them will say only those who were under the old covenant could technically enter into the new.
According to whom? According to Paul or according to Jesus?
Paul, I believe.
And then why did Paul say that Gentiles don't have to keep circumcision?
I think that they have the apocalyptic timetable at mind where Paul's like, come as you are, the end's about to happen anyways, that kind of mindset where the end is about to happen.
But only for Israelites, you said.
Right.
But Paul doesn't preach to Israelites. His whole point is that salvation goes to Jew and Gentile.
Right. And the way they equate that is kind of, they take Jason Staples' thesis all too well, that these are a accomplishment, a fulfillment of the lost tribes. They take that literally. They think potentially Paul believed, whether they were real literal Israelites or not, that Paul believed these were lost Israelites being saved. I like Staples' thesis personally, because Staples is saying, no, by faith, they join Abraham's family, if you will, and become descendants, if you will, through Christ of Abraham's seed, Galatians 3. But they do think that the whole point is to save Israel, including the Gentiles. And I don't mean to muddy the waters when I say I was researching in 1914 or 17. There was a British Israelite guy who mentioned something that sounds similar, that Paul's going after Gentile Israelites, if you will. His whole point is to save them. How can we show that God-fearers and proselytes, in a sense, are not Israelites? It's a question that I personally like to study, but do you have any?
I think it's got too many moving parts, really, even to address it, because there's just too many. There are too many words that can mean multiple things that are all being thrown out at the same time.
Right.
And so it's not clear it's not clear. Are you talking about what Paul thought he was doing? Are you talking about what he said in his writings? Are you talking about when you say Israelites, what do you mean? When you say salvation, what do you mean? I mean, for most of the Bible, salvation is not like going to heaven when you die. Salvation's got nothing to do with that. Salvation is the armies are coming, and are you going to survive or not? If you survive, you'll be saved. And so that's in the Old Testament. And even Paul, I don't know if you know this, but Paul never uses the verb saved as a past event. And so if somebody were to ask Paul, have you been saved? Paul would say, well, no, of course not. Because salvation for Paul is what's going to happen when Jesus returns from heaven and everybody else gets wiped out, but some people will survive and enter into the kingdom. That's when salvation happens. And so when people use terms like salvation, you've got to figure out what, when you're using that term, what do you mean by it? Because it may not be appropriate to think, Paul's using the term that way, or Israelite. Yeah. So most people think that Israelites. Most people think Israelites are people who are part of ethnic Israel.
Right.
And Paul certainly did not think that those were the only ones who were going to be saved. His whole point was that non-Israelites also can be saved. Gentiles can be saved.
And where would you go to quote that for somebody? Maybe how would you make that argument to someone if they are convinced that, because they see the Old Testament constantly prophesies the coming back, right? There's over and over, they're going to come back. The lost tribes. I've done a few interviews with Dr. Zvi Benit and then of course, Dr. Staples on this. There is this idea that Paul's harping on, using Hosea and other places in Romans 9-11 as though this is fulfilling it. But at the same time, when I read Romans 15, Paul's quoting about Gentiles and it's no reference to lost Israelites. And he's talking about the nations getting the light and stuff like that. So do you think Staples is onto something by saying Paul might be utilizing this prophecy stuff, applying them to his non-Israelite, ethnic Israelites, Gentiles, if you will?
I think Paul did believe that the Israelites would come back in. He did think that all Israel would be saved. He did, but he didn't think that was the whole story. He was equally influenced by Second Isaiah, which talks about a light to the Gentiles, and that God was using the rejection of the Jews as a way of bringing in non-Jews. So there is going to be a collection of Israel, but it's more than that. It's the entire world. And so Paul's a universalist. He believes that both Gentile and Jew will come in. And as to what to read, I mean, Romans chapters 1-3 is quite explicit on the point. And so is Galatians chapters, especially chapters 1-3 or 1-4 in Galatians. And so Paul absolutely doesn't think it's just about those who are parts of Israel. The whole point, Paul, in fact, I mean, it's even more astounding than that when you think about what Paul thought, because Paul looks at these passages in the second part of Isaiah which says about, I have made you a light to the nations, and that I've called you to preach to the nations. Paul thinks that he himself is the fulfillment of these prophecies. He thinks that God was talking about him when he gave this prophecy to Isaiah. So Paul is the fulfillment of God's promises. It's an astounding idea, but it's precisely because now salvation is not just for Jews; it's for Jews and Gentiles, and it's not based on the old covenant. It's based on Christ, whether you're Jew or Gentile.
Interesting. There's so much to unravel here. I asked you at the end of the last episode about Dr. Staples' work, and he's only written his book on, going from the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, and Second Temple literature and various things like Tobit, interesting book, Jubilees, Maccabees, these various texts that are talking about distinctions between Judaeos or Jew and Israel and Hebrew from Josephus. My question would be, and to probe now that I know his work a little more, how much do you line up with what he's saying? And I'm not trying to pitch you guys against each other, because I know that he was your student and he's a brilliant, absolutely brilliant guy. But scholars disagree all the time, and that's totally okay. What do you disagree about his thesis personally, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, so his book is part of his dissertation. So I directed his dissertation. And so it wasn't just that I was kind of a teacher. I mean, I directed his work.
Wow.
So, and the book that's coming out is part of the dissertation. The dissertation was very long. I forget what it was, 600 pages or something. It's like massive. It was like, oh my God, don't do that to an advisor, please. But it's a very detailed and compelling work in its way. And his idea was, if Paul says that all Israel will be saved, what does he mean by Israel? You would think somebody might have asked that question before, but people had asked it, but they hadn't done it the way he did, which is looked up every reference to Israel in every ancient Israelite, Jewish, Christian source, is like ever. And see, what do they mean by it? And so I think that his thesis on that Israel means the 12 tribes, that it's not talking about Jews per se, it's talking about the 12 tribes. I think that looks to me like it's probably right. I mean, I'm not completely committed to it. I'll be interested in seeing how the book gets reviewed by other experts. But it's a thorough job. It is a thorough job. And so that will be interesting. His next book will be taking it then to the question about what Paul means about all Israel will be saved. And he's either changed his view about that sometimes over the past, or I've understood him differently in the past. It's one of those two things. And so I'll wait to see what he ends up arguing in that book before I make a judgment on. But I think he's written that book. I think it's done. It just isn't, I don't know if it's been accepted for publication or if it's in line yet or not. But the first one is coming out pretty soon, I think.
Yeah, it's already out.
It's out.
Paperback yet. It's out on ebook.
Is it? Oh,
yes,
it's on ebook. Is it out in hardback already?
No, it's coming out in like a week or two.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, right.
Yes, sir. I'm really, really fascinated with it. So the last question I have is, James is writing to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. Scholarship says, well, the Jews constitute Israel. This goes right into the Staples vein of argument. The reason I'm going to pose this is this way. Clement, for example, writes in 1 Clement 29, he says, God has made us an elect portion. Clement's not an Israelite. Clement's not a Jew. Clement's a Christian. He's not even a Jewish Christian. He's just a Christian who's writing to the church in Corinth. And he's saying God has made us an elect portion. Most scholars date it anywhere from 70 to 96 AD approximately. To me, these non-Israelites are now using the ethnic tendencies of the words like elect and chosen to themselves, like Ephesians might be doing. That can confuse someone who's been reading a Hebrew Bible and then comes over to the New Testament and goes, are these guys Israelites? So this is why the whole vein of the conversation to you has been brought up. Do you think James is writing to only Jews in the diaspora, or do you think he's writing to a new constitution of what's called Israel, the 12 tribes of Jesus, if you will? What do you think's happening there?
So I definitely would not use First Clement as a way of interpreting James, but it's interesting that it is evidence of how people are using the term Israelite. And I don't think James knew it or anything. And First Clement can't date as early as 70. It's got to be in the 90s, I think. Right. But so in any event, James is clearly not writing to Jews. I mean, he's writing to Christians, and he's writing to followers of Jesus. And so he's using the 12 tribes as you're saying, as an indication of he's writing to the people who are chosen, the chosen people. And he's taking over the language that was used by ancient Israel to apply now to the followers of Jesus. I don't think this author himself was James. I don't think it was James, the brother of Jesus, at all. And I don't know, I somewhat doubt whether he himself is Jewish, but he has been influenced by, and who knows when he's writing. I mean, there's very few ways to date the book of James. It's very, very hard, except to say that, in my opinion, it looks like when he says that a person is saved by works not by faith alone, and he uses Abraham as the example, and he quotes Genesis 3:16. It's quite clear. It's not whatever it is.
Genesis 17 or something.
Whatever it is, yeah. That it's quite clear that he is writing after Paul, but I don't think he's responding to Paul. I don't think he's rejecting Paul. He looks to me like he's rejecting a kind of reading of Paul that you find in a book like Ephesians. And I map all this out in my book, Forgery and Forgery. It's a kind of a long argument, but the point is that would mean it'd have to be written after Ephesians. And so it's probably, I mean, we're talking at the end of the first century at best, early second century. By that time, Christian communities are identifying themselves as the chosen ones. And so they're happy to use Old Testament language about being the 12 tribes now.
And that's the same with First Peter, right? Where he's talking about the elect, he's writing to the elect and all that.
Yeah, he's clearly writing to Christians. He's not writing to Jews at all. So
wow, yeah. Dr. Ehrman, this has been fantastic.
Okay, yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join the Patreon. I release all of this stuff early. There's so much I can't even begin to tell you. Also, go to Amazon or probably go to Bart Ehrman. Would you prefer people to go? You can get the books through your website directly?
Yeah, I don't really care how they get the books. I would say, though, that I would like to remind people that if they're interested in this material, they should look at my blog, the Bart Ehrman blog.
Oh, that's right. Yes, sir.
If they will just Google that, Bart Ehrman blog, there it is. I talk about this stuff every day. Been doing it since 2012, 5 days a week, and there's a ton of stuff on there. So anything you're interested in, I do, and I answer anybody's questions on the blog. Anybody asks me a question, I answer. So they should think about joining.
Join the blog, ladies and gentlemen. He recently mentioned Myth Vision podcast as well. I hope to see this obviously there, and potentially even if you wanted to use this on your own thing, if you liked it. I just really appreciate your time, Dr. Ehrman, and thank you to the donor, the anonymous donor. You are the man. You know who you are. And let's do this again, Dr. Ehrman. I hope this wasn't as pain in the butt as the last one.
It was extremely wide ranging and everything was interesting. And so it was great. Yeah.
You are seriously wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Bart Ehrman on Myth Vision Podcast. Never forget, we are Myth Vision. Ladies and gentlemen, consider being a subscriber of Holy Kool-Aid. Thomas Westbrook puts so much time and energy into his channel, editing and promoting this information. A lot of it is very scholarly and well thought out. He's like me. He has a past as a fundamentalist Christian who's really trapped in this horrific worldview that makes you a broken individual requiring a God that watches your every deed, yet is never completely happy and satisfied unless you live according to his book or whatever denomination you might be part of. Really, go check it out. He has wonderful scholarship on there, and a lot of his ideas are helping free so many people from the horrific ideas that come from religion. I love you guys, and thanks so much. Make sure you go subscribe.